All right, good afternoon and welcome to PAC's first event of Philly Tech Week presented by Comcast. That is Philly Tech Week presented by Comcast. It's been 10 years of Philly Tech Week, and PAC is really proud to have supported and participated in every single one of them. Obviously a little bit different this year, and we're certainly excited for what that different brings. We've got a great lineup this week and certainly a terrific event here this afternoon. Our first event is sponsored by Cozen O'Connor. We are so grateful for Cozen's support, and we're certainly really excited for the addition that Cozen had made earlier this year by adding a terrific team from Bear Crossy to its already fantastic team of lawyers and corporate lawyers, et cetera. I'm going to get into them in just a minute here, but let me first get into this webcast. Attendees are muted with no video. We ask that you use the Q&A window to ask panelists questions. You can start dropping your questions as soon as they start talking. We will monitor and ultimately respond to them during the Q&A session at the end. The chat window is available. You can use that just for general messages or private messages to the attendees or hosts, or to make general comments. But again, for questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A window. Of course, follow this and follow us on social media at PhilipPact, hashtag PactPTW, and hashtag PTW20. I mentioned that Cozen acquired a terrific and long-standing firm here in the Philadelphia area, and today we're joined by two of those individuals that built Bear Crossy, Chris McDemus and Michael Crossy. And let me, at this point in time, introduce Chris. Chris McDemus is the co-chair of the Emerging Business and Venture Capital Practice at Cozen O'Connor, longtime supporter of the entrepreneurial community in the Philadelphia region, and certainly a friend to PACT. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Dean. And I just want to say a special thanks to Dean and Danielle and PACT for all of their help in putting this together and their ongoing partnership with Cozen. Everybody here at Cozen really enjoys PACT and all the programming they put on. They're a very important part of the Philadelphia ecosystem. So welcome, everybody. Thanks again for attending our virtual event. I too look forward to a day where we can all be in a room together, shaking hands and having an opportunity to network one-on-one. As Dean mentioned, I am the co-chair of Cozen's Emerging Business and Venture Capital Group. Cozen is a firm of about 750 attorneys, situated in 31 offices across the United States, plus Canada and the UK, headquartered out of Philadelphia. So our mothership is in the Philadelphia region. And Cozen is a full-service firm, but specific to the topic at hand today, it includes our Emerging Business and Venture Capital Group. That group spans several offices, represents high-tech life science, biotech, and other startups in all stages of the life cycle, from formation to exit. And we represent companies all across the United States from coast to coast. So we bring a significant amount of experiential knowledge to the table as a result. And Cozen as a firm has actually been working in this space actively for well over 20 years. So there's a lot of historical expertise in this space at the firm. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the moderator, my partner, Mike Crossy. Mike is also the co-chair of the Emerging Business and Venture Capital Group and has been a longtime partner of mine, both on our old platform and on our new one here at Cozen. So let me introduce Mike.
All right, thanks Chris and thanks Dean. Really excited to be here as well. Thanks for everybody for attending. I likewise want to thank Dean and PACT and Danielle. This I think is my first panel I'm moderating via Zoom, so I needed a lot of help in getting ready for this. And we're really excited to have all of our participants on the panel today. First is Emily Foote, who's a principal with Osage Venture Partners. And we have Emily Spitale, who is the Associate Vice President of Strategic Marketing and Communications at Temple University and also a committee member for the Philadelphia Global Identity Partnership. And last, but certainly not least, Brock Weatherup, who's been a longtime partner and friend, formerly president of Philly Startup Leaders, and also now CEO and co-founder of Metamorphosis. So Brock and Emily, thank you guys for participating.
Hey, everyone.
We see Brock with the very appropriate animal background. And is it just on me? Is everybody else on the screen as well? I want to make sure you guys are off mute. Oh, yep, okay.
Yep,
Now I can see everyone. As I said, I'm new at moderating the Zoom panel. So it's great to have you guys with us. And I think, as a way to kick off, it would be good for everyone in the audience if you guys could just each go around, maybe starting with you, Brock, and just give a little bit of your background, some of your Philly connections, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I've got Philly running through my blood, having spent eight wonderful years there building Pet 360 and then Pet Coach. Were two businesses that were both founded and both exited while in Philadelphia. Had the luck and privilege of also being the president of Philly Startup Leaders for a while, and frankly just loved my time there. I have since moved to San Diego, so we'll talk about all that and give a different sort of perspective after my last company, Pet Coach, was acquired by Petco, who is based here in San Diego. Prior to kind of being in the pet industry for the last basically 11, 12 years, spent a bunch of time at IAC or Interactive Corp and Ticketmaster.com, CitySearch, Match.com, and then also founded a business between that and the pet industry called Fathead, which is in the sports and entertainment arena. So I'm very excited to talk about kind of some of the perspectives on the Philly market from 3,000 miles away on the other side of the country, but have a very strong perspective of it. And frankly, from the day I left and moved out here, I've been a loud cheerleader from a long way away. So excited to kind of talk about that as we go through this session today. So thanks for having me.
Great, thanks so much, Brock. And then maybe I'll just use, I guess, initials for last names here. So Emily F. You know what? I don't think we can hear you. Are you muted, Emily? Is it just me?
Nope, she's muted.
Okay. All right, you know what? Well, maybe we'll jump to Emily Spitale. If you want to go, we'll just while Emily F. is getting unmuted.
Sure. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Spitale. I am currently heading up marketing at Temple University. I've been in higher education and healthcare marketing for all of my career. And I've been at Temple for about going on 6 years. And I am here today representing Temple, but also representing the PGIP, the Philadelphia Global Identity Partnership. And what we are doing currently, what we're working on, what the group is to help with the development and promoting the Philadelphia brand as part of our work as identifying Philadelphia as a global city. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today for you.
Great, thank you. And Emily F., do we have you on now?
Hope so. I could.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's nice to see everybody virtually. So I am from right outside of Philadelphia. I grew up here. I went to school here. I taught school here through Teach for America and the KIPP public charter schools. Then I went to law school here. And then I founded a company here, a tech company in 2011, which we grew here in Philly. We merged with the San Francisco company, and then we sold it to a Utah company. Through that time, I met Brock, who invited me to PSL to join the board for a few years during that time frame. And then just recently, I joined Osage Venture Partners to sit on the other side of the table as an investor, also we focus on the eastern half of the US, but have a strong affinity for the Philadelphia startup community. So I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
That's great. That's great. Well, it seems like, so we have, I think, Philly, San Francisco, Utah, San Diego, a lot of areas kind of covered. So no, I think this will be a great discussion. So, and just kicking off, Emily, Emily S., you had mentioned that, you work a lot around Philly's brand, and I think it would be helpful in setting the stage and sort of how we're looking at going through this. And by the way, to anybody on the panel, if there's questions, I think please feel free to jump in, ask them. Otherwise, I will try to keep an eye on the Q&A in the chat. But what we were thinking of doing is maybe starting off with a little bit of what is Philadelphia's DNA. And we would love to get your perspective just working as a marketer and with PGIP and what some of the research you've done. And then also Brock and Emily's perspective on what is Philly's tech and startup DNA in particular. And then maybe we can walk a little bit through, what are some of the benefits? What are some of the challenges? What can we do better? And then we'll be able to wrap it up with some Q&A. So Emily asked, anything that you guys have been seeing in your research in terms of what is kind of the core DNA of Philadelphia as a brand overall?
Yeah, sure. So just a little bit of background. So in 2018, Philadelphia became part of the Brookings Institute's Global Cities Initiative, which is a new-ish program that they are spearheading to provide metropolitan areas like Philadelphia with a framework to develop their global brands. So out of that, PGIP, the Philadelphia Global Identity Partnership, was created as a collaborative cross-sector effort to develop this cohesive, compelling global identity to help to position Philadelphia and the Philadelphia region as a premier destination for investment, business, and talent. So to tell you a little bit about the brand work that we've done, at the very beginning of the process, the Brownstein Group in Philadelphia completed a brand discovery project that included a perception assessment, which is very typical for a brand development work and brand strategy work. And they also did some high-level messaging. And some of the things that I think that would be interesting or important to the folks here today is some of the insights that came out of that discovery work, which include Philly's attitude and personality set it apart. Some things for you to kind of think about as you're thinking about this conversation. This is where you get the grit, the passion, the resilience when you think about Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia's history propels it into the future. We have history, as we know. And we also have a legacy of first that some may know and some may not know, but we're also a community of makers. Diversity, of course, is in the fabric of Philadelphia. Diversity and multiculturalism make the region dynamic and textured. And you can actually live in Philly, high quality of life and affordability. And the Philadelphia experience, which I think is actually important for this group when you kind of develop it a little bit more, is about human connection. So it's big city with a small town feel. And we have that tight-knit supportive network where professionals can grow their relationships. And that professional network is fairly easy to build, maybe compared to other cities. So these are some of the areas and some of the insights where PGIP in particular can be helpful as a collaborative group looking to build the brand and take the city's brand and the city to the next level. So for instance, that Philadelphia's commitment to supporting new talent can help to position the city as one of the world's next great places for economic opportunity and to grow your business. So you think about it in a way of capitalizing on those opportunities, taking what's in our DNA, but also adding kind of where we want to go, what our vision is. And that's where you get your aspirational brand and what sort of takes you to the next level. And PGIP has really been developed to be a catalyst in that. So think taking our city of first, that tenacious, determined, industrious characteristic, to a city of big thinkers where there's innovation, entrepreneurs, and change makers. So this is in short kind of what PGIP is and what our work is focused on.
Well, that's great. That's great. And I think that, it was interesting. I jotted down a few notes. I mean, I think a lot of the things that you're saying that came out in your research are something I've personally experienced. I actually was originally from Pittsburgh and then had worked in the entrepreneurial ecosystems in Pittsburgh and in New York, as well as in Philadelphia, and ultimately chose to settle here. In large part for some of that specifically, I mean, talking about the professional networks, I always thought it was very close knit and very tight. So it's interesting that that's what your research was showing. So Brock and Emily F., I'd be curious, is there anything that you guys have seen through all of your ventures, everything you've invested in and worked in, that you think makes Philadelphia unique? I know a lot of cities like to think, whether it's Silicon Alley, whether it's Silicon Valley or Austin, that there's something unique about their startup scene. I'd be curious if there's anything that you guys are seeing that really seems to set Philadelphia apart.
Well, I'll give a perspective, which is, again, I came into Philadelphia, so this is basically 2009. And, kind of through that experience, clearly the university system, I think, is one of the greatest assets of the community. I think Philadelphia also has a very good capability kind of beat up on itself really on that front. I know when I was the head of Philly Startup Leaders, I kept talking about okay, there was all the brain drain conversations, which I just thought was BS, because all these universities brought all these amazing people. And even if 50% of them stay, that's 50% more amazing people that the education system has kind of brought into Philadelphia. And one quick, tiny shout out, which I would say to Temple, we hired a bunch of work study students from Temple, and it was amazing. I think those sorts of programs and having access to those sorts of programs, we tried to find that same sort of dynamic here in San Diego. And with all due respect to several amazing universities here in San Diego, the programs and the engagement of the universities with the community, I think, is a very, very positive and also a huge asset to basically the city of Philadelphia, the startup community of Philadelphia, and the support of Philadelphia. And then, I'd say last but not least is that, one of the great advantages is the variety of corporate headquarters that are in Philadelphia. So whether it's everything from your Aramarks of the world to your Five Belows to, your Revzillas to obviously, Comcast and its major, sort of leadership in the community. I think those couple things I just would add to what Emily S. said, that I just think are huge, unique assets to, the Philadelphia community.
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
Please go ahead, Emily. No, please go ahead.
I was going to just add to Brock with that. The variety of headquarters, I think, is one of the most unique things about Philadelphia and the East Coast as a whole, particularly with the startup community, because they're seeing business problems. And so when they're starting companies, they're coming at it from, what is that problem I'm going to solve? Instead of the tech first mindset of, I have this great tech and then let me find the problem to match it with. And additional to Brock, so we're good at identifying problems because of that exposure to the diversity of industries. And then we're effective at solving them because, and this is something that Emily was saying, and Brock, because of the diversity of talent we have and the backgrounds they have coming from, in particular, the strong university system we have. And I found that was a very stark difference from when I was connected with the San Francisco community through a merger we did, and then through the acquisition with Utah, that there was a little more homogeneous feel there as opposed to what we had here in Philadelphia. So I'll +1 Brock's last point there.
Perfect. That's great. And I think, hopefully I don't want to be too repetitive here. So in some ways, it sounds like some of the aspect of, the DNA of Philadelphia's startup and technology ecosystem, they're all positive. So I was going to lead in, and the next question, or I think sort of the next topic here is, well, why Philly, but why not Philly, right? Which is what everybody's saying. So, maybe an interesting question then would be, if I was a new entrepreneur and I was looking at where to build my startup, and I think, Brock, we may have talked about this before too, but I'd be curious to get, everybody's perspective, is where would you recommend to build it? And, I think to the extent we haven't already hit on them, whether it's diversity or a close professional network that you can develop here, the university system, or the diversity of headquarters that we have, are there other strengths or other challenges that we should think of if for entrepreneurs and people starting companies on this panel, or not on the panel, but in our audience, that they should be thinking about? So I'll leave it open. Maybe Brock, we'll start with you again.
I think, look, every community has an incredible capacity to identify why they aren't the place to start a company. And so, I mentioned this a couple of times. So, I always was, talking in Philadelphia, and I was just trying to help us while we were in Philadelphia to feel proud of what we had in Philadelphia and not focus on all the things that aren't necessarily in Philadelphia, because there are way more things that are in Philadelphia than aren't. When I moved out to San Diego, decided, hey, I'm going to really get involved in a startup community here in San Diego. Isn't this going to be amazing? I went up to an equivalent of a PACT or a Philly Startup Leaders event here. And it was the most amazing thing I've ever, because I literally, the person who was in essence the president of the group out here, like said the same exact things in the same exact ways in the same exact structure, except, replace, New York and Boston with LA and San Francisco, right? And replace Philadelphia with San Diego. It was brain drain. It was lack of access to capital. It was, everybody wants to talk about I like talking about consumer things, but it has a tendency to dominate conversations. Like there's no consumer brands in San Diego, like all these sorts of things. And like, I was just like, give me a break. Like, I mean, it was part of the conversation I was having in Philadelphia, but it's also the same thing here. And like everywhere just kind of, creates that sort of dynamic. And, maybe it's my wife, calls me relentlessly optimistic, but like, it's like build your business where you want to build your business. And if it's a great business, it will get funded. And if it's a great business, it will attract talent. And if it's a great situation that brings you and your team and your idea, the excitement and the passion, the motivation that it takes to start a business, because starting a business is really freaking hard. Like if you don't have all those elements, where you are is irrelevant. And so there are ways to make that better. Like if you have certain categories of things or things you want to do, like I am amazed in San Diego, like the amount of clean tech conversations I've been exposed to, the amount of biopharma and hardcore networking, back end infrastructure, cellular, everything else, that sort of thing that happens here. Like, okay, there may be, less, okay, consumer on it, but there's plenty of consumer if you look for it. Also, but and you can find those sorts of dynamics. And so when I was finished we'd sold prior company Pet360 to PetSmart. And when that finished, I was kind of maybe 3/4 of the way through my time in Philadelphia. My wife and I kind of looked at each other and we're looking at businesses and what we're going to do, became a fairly active angel investor in Philadelphia. And it was like, where were we going to go start a business? And we thought about a whole bunch of different places because we had no kind of direct ties to Philly in terms of family. And we made the decision to start Pet Coach because it was the right place to start it, with the right network, with the right group of support, because there is this, the unbelievable thing about Philly, which is, I would say, is not here in San Diego, and everyone's supposed to be nicer in San Diego than they are in Philly. But I would say in Philly, the most amazing thing was like the amount of people you could call and ask for help or ask a question or get connected was so easy on a relative basis. It's still hard. You still got to have a reason. You don't want to waste people's time. But like relative to here, it's been so much harder to connect in San Diego around it. And it's just, how open the Philadelphia community is to it, how supportive is, I think, are just, and that sort of being able to ask and get someone to help is just an incredibly valuable point. So, in terms of building your business.
That's great. That's great. And I think that's really insightful. So Emily, I'd love to hear if you have anything to add on that.
I agree 100% on that. And I think I tend to be much more optimistic than the opposite. I think it's really exciting where Philadelphia is compared to some of the more mature startup hubs. So I think everybody knows this, how we were just named the top emerging startup ecosystem or startup hub in the US. And there's incredible things happening that other people are now recognizing. There's a VC on the West Coast, his name is Fred Wilson, and he talks about the Darwinian evolution of startup hubs. And he equates them to forests where you have these tall trees, and the trees mature and grow older, and then they spread their seeds and new trees grow up. And we have some incredible tall trees in Philadelphia. So Instamed, which Osage and Ben Franklin invested in early, had sold last year for 500 million plus. We had Accolade had $1 billion exit or IPO, this summer. And then you have stories like RJ Metrics, which sold, I think it was 14 or 16, I can't remember, 16. And 4 years later, you're seeing one of the co-founders there, Bob, starting Crossbeam, which is getting West Coast funding right now. And then one of his teammates, Tristan Handy, and a few others who's co-founded Fishtown Analytics, which just raised a Series A from Andreessen Horowitz. And you're seeing these smaller trees come up and this community just growing. Yes, we're the top emerging, not a mature older one like San Francisco or even New York, who's a little ahead of us. But we have this incredible forest that's blooming here. And then to Brock's point and Emily's earlier point, it's just a very open, accessible community where everybody wants to help continue to grow that forest and make each other stronger. I mean, when I started practice in 2011, the ability to call some of the more seasoned entrepreneurs and ask for help was so easy. And now we have Ben Franklin and PAC with Mentor Connect trying to, institutionalize that. And it's just a pretty special place because of that. I do think another thing which would be interesting to talk about though is, the impact of COVID and how important is region, or how easy is it to connect with others to even make that forest larger?
Oh, I would actually, you know what? So you're reading my notes, because I did have a note on that, and I'd love everyone's perspective. So maybe now is an interesting time to jump to that before we could jump to any of the challenges. So I'd love to hear from each of you in terms of, is COVID changing? Maybe it was more a perception, because I think everything we're hearing so far, and I do want to actually dig into this a little bit more on where some of our challenges might be, or just how we can continue to improve. But there at least is a perception of a lot of young entrepreneurs and then maybe not so young entrepreneurs that, well, to get funded, I need to be in Silicon Valley, or I need to be in New York, or one of these markets. Is COVID having an impact on priorities of founders and priorities of investors, and what people are sort of looking for, and maybe some of that historical perspective? So, Brock?
Yeah, I think I think some of the dynamics around kind of COVID are very, well, first off, there's lots of things that are very industry relevant. So you got to kind of be careful about kind of what that is, because that's an overhang. Like if you're in the cruise industry versus being in the virtual meeting industry, right? You got a very different impact of COVID. So if we kind of leave industry a little bit kind of outside of it, I think there is, the ability for businesses to happen wherever. I think, only increases because of this. I think you're seeing, I've been amazed about a whole bunch of people that, were colleagues, friends, folks who could create things happen that were living in New York that have moved permanently out of New York and are now other places in the world. One actually moved to Philadelphia, but others are like Hilton Head, South Carolina, or to New Hampshire, right? I think those sorts of dynamics happen. I think where it's a little bit harder is when you get younger. So I think, I was talking to somebody the other day that made a very interesting point around COVID, which is, it's someone who has like someone like me, or frankly, everyone is like, where you have an established network, where you have an established connection base, you can do it from anywhere in this COVID world. If you're a 25-year-old and you're building your network, it's a much, much, much harder situation to not be able to go to the dinners, go to the conferences, meet people, get to know people, build that network. Because like your 25 to 35 is your network building, quote unquote, prime, I would say. And for folks that are in that sort of, I think it is a real challenge. And I think there's a very different sort of networking and very difficult way for people to kind of engage around that, which I think is a struggle for that group. And we'll see how that plays out depending on how long this goes. But, I know I look at, the amount of travel that I'm going to do is dramatically less. And I think that's forever changed in my life. I think the amount of meetings that need to be, quote unquote, in person, I think will be forever changed, and so I think, the flexibility of it, the comfort of doing things like this, even if we don't necessarily like virtual conferences or virtual panels or all that sort of stuff. And we are humans after all, we do like human interaction, and that is a really valuable thing. I think, the ability to be wherever is a much higher, the amount of, conversations that I think individuals, couples, partners are having with one another is, where do we want to be while we're doing this, right? And where is it going to be? And I think that is a question that's affecting entrepreneurs and investors and all the sorts of things that go along with it. I think companies, large companies are approaching, I think it's interesting that Facebook, tripled down on real estate in New York, while others are like, we're not coming back for a year and you can work wherever you want. And so I think there's a whole lot of dynamics that are still at play there. So, I think that's the challenge. So.
That's great. And Emily, since you actually raised the question, are you seeing anything different, or is Osage looking at things any differently in terms of either a preference for where companies might be located or how you're connecting with entrepreneurs in the COVID environment?
So I think the first thing that we're doing is the intensity of our diligence. We always did pretty deep diligence, but now it's even more so. So the first company that we invested in post-COVID was a company called Malback, which is really great company in the contract lifecycle management space. And we never met them in person. And it was the first time ever that Osage made an investment in a company that they never met in person. And like all investors, you're focusing on the people who are building the company. They're the most important thing. And that connection with them is critical in terms of determining whether or not to make the investment. And so we just doubled down on our diligence, had double the amount of reference calls, had more meetings with them. And, you know, it's still early, but we think we made a pretty good call on them. It's also interesting from them from a perspective of, they have been a remote first company from a perspective of building their business. So they have you know, a office here in Philadelphia area, but also San Francisco and also India. And I think when you have that remote first start, you have to have a deep intentionality of how do you create those connections that Brock is talking about with the younger generation that doesn't have an established network. So analogous to starting a company, how do you ensure those moments where you create those strong human connections that ultimately are the backbone of you growing a company and scaling it? And Malback in particular, not to keep talking about them, but they're really kind of a case study for this, is so amazingly intentional about how they're doing that to connect their team in India with their team in South Jersey, with their team in San Francisco. And I think it's a page that all of us should steal from, not only in building companies, but particularly for this conversation of how do we create an ecosystem with that kind of intentionality to help the younger generation create a network that will ultimately help them grow their companies. And I think that takes a lot of work. And I've been very impressed with watching Pact go through, you know, the last couple of weeks of just how they've navigated the change from a perspective of their mission. So it'll be interesting to see it play out, but I think all companies are going to have a very high EQ to do this well, to make their companies successful.
I'll add one thing just around that, which is kind of the whole virtual, you know, group, right? And kind of remote first, because that's, you know, like our team right now, right, of Metamorphosis partners is in San Diego, but we have LA, New York, Philadelphia. We have a decent sized team in Philadelphia, Wisconsin, and in Brazil, right? I mean, that's where we started. Now, what we're learning how to figure out how to do is how do you then create those interactions, you know, that create those positive sort of dynamics. And I think that's a leadership challenge that kind of exists. I'd be curious, Emily asked, like, as you guys are thinking about how do you help graduating, you know, seniors or folks, like how to start to think about, I know it's so early and no one knows, but like how to think about networking and connections in a COVID world. I don't know if there's anything that you have that, or anything that the school is doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of this, you know, makes me think about the fact that no matter what you're doing, or what your business is, COVID has definitely created opportunity. You know, it's changed things, and probably, like you said, changed things forever in some cases. It has created opportunity and different ways of approaching things and looking at things. But I think no matter what we're doing, you have to begin to pressure test, even some of the things that I said at the top of this about the Philadelphia brand. We have to look at the Philadelphia brand. We have to look at the Temple brand. We have to look at what our customers are and our constituents are, how they are feeling about things through a different lens. We have to now lay that COVID lens over everything, because it has changed. It has changed people. It has changed how they behave. It has changed priorities. It has changed how they feel about things. So all of us have to do that and have to pressure test what we have known up until this happened. So that's one of the things that we're definitely doing as a university, as an institution of higher education, because, you know, this remote learning, which has been, you know, online learning isn't anything new, but the experiences that our students are having in this moment, you know, in the middle of a crisis that has lots of other tentacles that are impacting their lives, it's different, and you have to take all of that into consideration, and it very well could and probably will change how prospective students will want to engage with institutions of higher education forever. And we have to kind of figure that out as quickly as we can.
Sure. This is this has been great, I think, so far, and it's interesting hearing about so many of the positives. I think, how COVID's accelerating some of this. I know, because we're going to try to leave a little bit of time in the end for some questions. So I am curious to just get everyone's perspective. And Emily asked, maybe we'll stick with you, because we first talked about the branding of, Philadelphia, and, I think, again, it was all very positive. So one question I do want to ask is, what do you see as the challenges in the overall branding of Philadelphia? And then Emily F. and Brock, I'd be curious too, from the startup ecosystem, what can we do better and what are the challenges? Because, I do think there's probably a lot of people in the audience that feel, well, we're not Silicon Valley yet. So, what do we do to get there, and do we care? Do we want to be there? So Emily S.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the challenges are probably not completely unlike a lot of cities where there's, there's the kind of the, I don't want to say typical ones, but there's, crime and poverty and, maybe some perception at least that there can be challenges within the government, between the government and the businesses, or being business friendly, or, government funding and things like that, which I think a lot of cities have similar challenges. I think one of the biggest ones for Philadelphia is more of that that perception. It lies in the perception of who we are, and that's that underdog mentality, which in some ways is not a bad thing, because if you're an underdog, you're usually pretty resilient and tenacious, and you have a lot of energy, a lot of spark, a lot of creativity, but because you're wanting to get somewhere. But we sort of rest on that. We sort of, we sort of put it out front instead of thinking about it as a way to get us to the next level, which I think is what I was trying to say in the beginning. Who you are and what is in your DNA doesn't mean that you can't be aspirational, and that's what this is about, right? This is about how do you take those characteristics and the best pieces of you and get to the next level. And I think we can be very apologetic about who we are, instead of taking our place and being more bold and saying, yes, we deserve to be a global city. And so those are the things that we're trying to get people to understand and think about, as how they can use that in your own, how you can use that in your own work, and how coming together. The great thing about this project and about this partnership, which should go on for as long as Philadelphia does in some ways, is that it is that collaboration and bringing people together. And coming out of it, being in a crisis and coming out of a crisis, how many times have you in your own world said, we're stronger together, we have to collaborate, we have to be together on this, we have to all be sort of moving in the same direction and thinking the same things, just when you're talking about something like COVID, like a virus, and it's the same thing, we're going to be stronger together. So I think that, capitalizing on the fact that we are a tight-knit community, but not letting the kind of the rough edges of Philadelphia get in the way, instead using them as a way to build us up and to talk about, why that means that we can actually push forward and do even greater things.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's really, it's great to view things, at the identity level, and I agree 100%. Brock and Emily F., is there anything then that, particular challenges that you guys see separate from the overall identity that Emily sort of went through? But you hear things, and certainly myself representing entrepreneurs and working with a lot of companies getting funded, we hear these kind of things all the time. Well, I don't have access to the right capital. And I think Brock really made a great point earlier in saying, look, if it's a good company, you'll get funded. And, I can certainly testify to everybody in the audience that we've seen that over and over and over again, capital coming in from other markets, wherever the startup might be located. But you hear, we don't have the right access to talent, or we don't have the right access to capital, or, whatever it may be. Is there anything in particular, do you guys see truth in that? Or if you said there was one thing I'd really like to work on in Philadelphia, what would that be?
Yes, I'd love to add one point here. I think the thing that I see as the biggest challenge for Philadelphia is the access to early capital. So seed stage and earlier. And Brock, I'd love your thoughts on it, because you've been an active angel investor. From my own personal experience, and this was a few years back, but I still think it holds true today. We merged with a company in 2015 from San Francisco for two primary reasons. One, they had a mobile team and they were working on something similar, and we had web developers. So it was a great tech marriage. But two, their founder had multiple successful businesses, had an incredibly strong network on the West Coast, and had easier access to capital than myself and my two co-founders, none of which had ever started a company or had that access or had that past success to prove that we could be successful in another venture. And so it was very intentional to merge with them to help us with our seed. Now, Ben Franklin did invest in us, but nobody else from this region in that seed stage. So we had social capital on the West Coast and a city light up in New York, but not in Philly. So I think there's a real barrier to entry there from the seed stage. To be positive, on our positive note, I've been very impressed with what Philadelphia startup leaders have been doing to tackle this problem, which is they've had an accelerator program for MVP accelerator, so minimally viable product you come with. But they have recently created an idea, I think it's called Idea Stage Fund, where if you have an idea, you can get that early capital. Because, it's known, I think, just from a lack of diversity of founders is typically because they can't get over that first stage. And so PSL is trying to help people get that early money so that they can then get to the MVP stage and beyond to win the attention from the accelerators or from Ben Franklin technology partners. So I think we still have a lot of work to do there. One, from a perspective of access to capital, but two, from a perspective of increasing the diversity of our founders. And PSL is doing a great job on both of those fronts. And our community as a whole is doing a great job in supporting them and doing that with capital.
I think, one thing I would add, is, look, early capital is really hard everywhere. It just because guess what? Everybody wants to bet on something that's been proven, which is, oh, by the way, the definition of not early capital. Right. So everybody on the planet is very happy to invest in the high growth, 10 million of revenue, $3 million of EBITDA, big TAM, right? Okay. Yeah. Well, there are 1,000 investors already ready to do that. And early stage is early stage. It's really hard. I would actually say accessing early stage capital in a area like San Diego, which is a very wealthy community, has had a lot of massive economic access or success, was harder here than it was in Philadelphia. Now, I think part of the reason of that, I think, Emily, exactly to your point of you merged with a company that had founders with prior exit, right? Look, I also understand it's a whole lot easier for someone like me to go out and raise capital because I've had multiple exits and that happens. First company was really hard, right? Really, really, really hard, right? And I think, I think when somebody talks about well, why not, or why can't I find that earlier capital, or I can't find talent, or I can't find other things, my usual comment to them is stop, look in the mirror, start figuring out why what you have isn't exciting, because that's what's driving it. If it's exciting, people show up. If it's exciting, investors show up. If it's exciting, if it's got a path, if it's got a plan, if it's got the key things of great team, great market, solving a great problem, right? Investors are those three things, period, end of story. then you'll find it. If you're not getting that sort of response, then by the way, I would really challenge that, that entrepreneur to be like, okay, why not? Like, find people to give you honest advice. Why not? Versus, everyone wants to be the hero of being the first check-in on something that's massive. Like, everybody wants to be that. Very few people are willing to write checks. Very few people just fundamentally just don't. Right. And that's that's the nature of growing businesses. That's not a Philadelphia issue. That's not a San Diego issue. It's not a San Francisco issue. There might be some more capital in some different categories that might give you, if I wanted to start a infrastructure tech business, networking business here in San Diego, there's probably a little bit more access to capital because there's more people who feel more comfortable in it that might be willing to write that very risky first check. Right? Might you have a little bit more ability to get that early first check to a consumer app in San Francisco than you would in San Diego or in Philadelphia or New York? Probably, right? Because there's just more knowledge. Like, I'm more comfortable writing early stage checks into things that are consumer. But if somebody in San Diego walked up to me and said, hey, I want to do something in the networking business, I'd be like, I have no interest in investing at that at an early stage. Not a chance. Right. Now, at the same time, I said, hey, I have a consumer app that's going to be okay, maybe around pet or around, consumer or some sort of emotional business that I feel very comfortable about. Like, I'll be all over it. So I just, again, I think a lot of it is just the reality of, if you're not attracting great people, then ask yourself why. Don't blame it on where you are. Don't blame it on this, because it's like, there's a lot more to it than that. And I think it's easier to go, it's somebody else's fault why I'm not getting X or Y or Z, when it's likely not that. And it's likely there's some challenge to your model. There's some challenge to your own team. There's some challenge to your style, leadership, whatever you want to call it. Something's not breaking through and you have to solve that. And that's an introspective effort versus a, existential sort of one. So I would just kind of always be aware of that.
I think the great thing, though, on that from a Philly plug is we are not afraid to be direct in this community.
Correct.
Come to Philly.
I like it. And I know we are probably running a little short on time. I see Dean hopping back on here. So there's a couple of questions. Go ahead, Dean. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just hopping back on to help with Q&A a little bit and just let the audience know Q&A window's open. Feel free to add some questions. I know we had a couple final questions just from the pre-work. One of them was directed at Emily Spitale, specifically around the PGIP approach for improving Philadelphia's global profile. You talked a little bit about that, Emily, but you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, really specifically right now, the group is, still relatively new or in the newer stages of coming together and working. But the one really specific and important project that we're working on and should be able to launch at the beginning, I think at the beginning of the new year, is a new sort of brand site for Philadelphia. So if you have ever looked at any other city sites, Atlanta has a brand toolbox. Some of the some other international cities do. That have been through this Brookings process. We are working on that right now. So that will be a place where we will be able to share more about what the Philadelphia brand is and how it is evolving and developing, and some tools and assets that folks can start to use in their own work. And hopefully it will become a place where there can be a forum for more engagement and interaction. And we definitely want to showcase the people and places and organizations and businesses that are using the brand and doing a nice job of that, and sharing best practices for folks, so that it's not a difficult thing to grab onto it and use it in your own work and use it to move your own businesses and priorities and goals forward. An example of that, just so that you can see it right now, is there's a website that was just launched for Philadelphia 250, and they took the existing brand strategy and used that on their website, which makes a whole lot of sense. But you can kind of see it in action if you take a look at that site, if you want an example of that.
And I should point out, Emily, because you will be too humble to do so, you did an incredible job as the lead for Temple in coalescing all of your disparate marketing approaches into, first of all, a consistent message across all your different entities, schools, et cetera, but with the Philadelphia Global Identity Partnership core narrative as an underlying message.
Right, 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 exactly. Yes.
And that's a takeaway for everybody on this phone, because, for Philadelphia to continue to grow and grow inclusively, we need to spread the message ourselves. And so it's not just about spreading that message externally, globally, but also spreading that message here in Philadelphia so that we're equipping each other with the stories to share.
Hey, Dean, one thing I think just to add to that is just like, as someone who's a massive fan of Philadelphia, like the amount of times I bring it up to entrepreneurs in my communities in LA and San Diego, like there's a part to it of, okay, people have kind of gone through Philly, felt the opportunity there, and then leave. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I will tell you, not a lot of people in San Diego talk about Philly, with all due respect. But they don't talk about New York either. So like, or Boston or anything, there's nothing that good that happens on the East Coast, right? So all of a sudden, having that sort of conversation and more entrepreneurs coming out of it, the successes that's built. I mean, when I was when I got to Philadelphia 10, 11 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff coming out of Philadelphia to kind of spread around the world. There is so much more of that there in the network of people who are from Philly that have gone on to do other things, both in Philadelphia and outside of Philadelphia, I think is just really, I think is exciting momentum for the city, and something that, I think is just something I'm pretty proud of from a long way away. So.
Well, we're excited to have you on this panel. And one of the things that virtual allows, Brock, is for you to participate without much of a challenge.
Exactly. So Dean, I don't know if we have a couple more minutes. Yeah, I was going to say there's a few.
There's a couple questions, and really, just to kind of condense. One was, it was a comment about framing Philly versus everyone is both helpful and not. And to be honest, that was a little bit of tongue in cheek. We didn't create that. It was actually Detroit. Detroit was mentioned later. So you can go look up how that all came to be, but it does kind of capture a little bit of the Philly attitude, as we like to say. Yes, it is true that virtual has created or eliminated barriers from a geographic entry perspective. And I guess maybe the question to the panel is, we do talk about geography as so important in so many regards, but I always like to say capital is very portable. Maybe it's less portable at the earliest of stages. Emily, do you have any perspective on that?
In terms of the capital being portable?
Yes.
I agree 100%. It can come from anywhere. I think early stages, maybe the network helps you find it, and typically regionally you can help build that network. But I think one of the accelerators of COVID is going to be that companies are going to have this remote first or remote preferred workforce. And the people in that workforce are going to be that can be in any of these companies are going to, some are going to be from Philadelphia, and it's going to heighten our reputation even more because of the grit and diversity and everything Emily talked about early on. That'll just keep attracting people to Philadelphia. But to answer the capital, I do think it's portable, and now talent will be as well.
And how, and for everybody, how do you get access to investors, particularly now? You have no relationships. Maybe you think you don't have a network. I will tell you that all of you listening right now have a network. It's just a matter of leveraging it. But how do you get access to investors?
I think one thing I was going to add, Emily, and also kind of addressing Dean, what you were saying, like, part of like what we're building at Metamorphosis is a focus on the consumer and pet, right? We're actually launching this week, we're called Clark Pet Opportunities Fund, where we're going to create $150 million fund focused on consumer in the pet industry. I think you're going to see a lot more focus on things like that. And so I think finding access to that network is finding the right money. So if somebody in Philadelphia or in Des Moines or in Portland, Maine has an idea around pet and the consumer pet, I hope or expect that they will find us because we're, relatively speaking, early stage growth capital, right? Focused on the pet industry. We're bringing expertise. We bring a network to that. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that sort of, whether it's, kind of Osage saying, hey, this is what we're really good at. I think VCs and capital sources are going to go narrower and more focused because they're going to bring that network to a lot of early stage entrepreneurs that don't necessarily know how to navigate that and can't go to the conferences to make those connections. And I think you'll see that whether that's a 12-month, 24-month, 34-month window. But I think if you're looking for capital, like look for where it's highly relevant. I think that's a forever thing, but I think it's particularly important right now. Like, again, if you're a network startup in Philadelphia and you want some money from me, don't ask. I'm not gonna be able to help in any way, shape, or form. If it's consumer, maybe I'm a little bit closer. If it's consumer pet, definitely interested, right? And I think for entrepreneurs finding that, and whether that's kind of individually or like, you got to do the legwork to find the right money, and then connect on that. Look at what companies have invested in, what's similar, what's a comp, what's a scenario where, hey, like somebody's investing in something similar to what that looks like. And I think that's where you can find the right money.
Yeah, and I would plus one that one as well. If you know exactly what the investor is looking for, so Osage is B2B software, Series A, meaning you're about around the $1 million mark in revenue traction, and we focus on the eastern half of the country. So if you fit in that mold and you reach out to us, our analysts will take a look at you and we'll take a deeper look and set up a call with you. And we're always looking for new things like that. So we'd welcome that email, that cold email from you. So just to plus one, Brock, just do your homework of what the investors are looking for. And if you fit in that world, reach out to them, and I can almost guarantee you'll get a response.
Yeah, Dean, I might just weigh in real quick on that. I have a quick thought. Very often clients come to us and they look at lawyers and accountants as like the hub of a wheel, right? And that we know a lot of people and we can make introductions. And that's certainly a value add, I think, that we bring to the table as lawyers. We do have very extensive networks of people that fund companies because of the deals we do. But I will say this, every client I've ever worked with that has closed a successful financing generally brings 10 times more relationships to the table than I have brought. And they all have extensive lists, and I can see the research and the hard work they've done to find the folks they're reaching out to. So I think ultimately finding investors really does fall to the founders in the company. You got to put the grit and the hard work in. I really think that's where the opportunities come from.
We do have incredible resources in this community, and there are a lot of questions about both capital, how to get in, how to get a job. There's a lot of different resources mentioned. Certainly, we try to be a strong resource at PACT for that connection to the capital, as well as talent and customer relationships. You talk about PSL, what Technically is doing here with Philly Tech Week. Michael, Chris, you've developed an incredible reputation of working with entrepreneurs. Somebody asked, how do I get into entrepreneurship if I don't have any experience? There's a lot of different ways to seek these resources out. Feel free to follow up with us, Danielle Pinto, on this. Email her, we'll get back to you. This session was recorded, will be shared. We didn't address some of the questions specifically, but we will follow up with you. We'll save those and follow up with you. And I really just want to close by thanking both Chris and Michael from Cozen, along with their colleagues, Michael Heller, who sits on the PAC board, Ira Gubernick, who's a close friend and leader within the firm. They are a tremendous resource, and you should seek them out as well. They have terrific connections, not only to legal expertise, but to the capital side and the entrepreneurial journey, which is why we're so grateful for their support and them supporting this specific program. I want to congratulate Chris Wink and the Technically team for Philly Tech Week. We're not done yet. We have a Penn Contributions panel on Wednesday, the 23rd at 1 o'clock. Please register and sign in. And our grand finale, the Lion's Den. And the Lion's Den is actually not on the not at 1 o'clock on the 24th. And Danielle Pinto is going to come off mute to correct that in just a minute.
It is at 10 a.m. on the 24th, everybody.
It is at 10 a.m., not 1 p.m. on the 24th, 10 a.m. The Lion's Den is the final 3 companies as selected by a group of 5 Lions. And when we're talking about capital, one of the reasons we started the Lion's Den was to showcase just how much seed capital happens in Philly without people really knowing it. And let me just tell you, you'll be excited to tune in at 10 a.m. on Thursday to see what happens in the 6th annual Lion's Den. So again, thank you to our panelists. Brock, so great to see you from afar. Emily and Emily, a little closer, but for all that you're doing to help entrepreneurs and Philadelphia. And again, once again, to Michael and Chris. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.